Marcus wiped his sweaty palms on his janitor's uniform. Through the boardroom's glass doors, 12 people in expensive suits were about to destroy everything. Emma's voice echoed in his head. "Daddy, did you help people today, like in my picture?" He pushed open the door. "Excuse me." Victoria Sterling didn't look up from her merger documents. "This is a private meeting." Marcus walked straight to the conference table. His cleaning cart's squeaky wheel announced each step. "The environmental data you're voting on is fake," he said quietly. "And I have proof." Victoria's laugh was ice cold. "Security." 30 seconds, Marcus said, pulling crumpled pages from his pocket. "That's all I need to save your $10 billion deal." The security guard paused. Board Chair Williams raised an eyebrow. "You have 15 seconds, Mr. Rodriguez. Marcus Rodriguez." He placed the papers on the polished wood. "And your company is about to poison half the state." A child's crayon drawing fluttered from Marcus's cart to the floor. Stick figures. A man with a badge labeled Hero. Victoria glanced at it and smirked. "How touching. Security, remove the cleaning guy." "I've been mopping up your chemical spills for 6 months." Marcus's voice stayed calm, but his hand shook. "Tuesday and Thursday nights, every week. While you slept in your mansion, I was cleaning up poison." Dr. Chen grabbed the contamination reports. Her face went white. "These readings," she looked up at Victoria, "these weren't in our environmental review." Marcus felt his heart pounding. Emma believed her daddy protected people. Tonight, he had to prove she was right. "Someone scheduled those chemical dumps during my shift," Marcus continued. "Someone who knew a janitor's word wouldn't matter. Someone who thought I was too stupid to understand what I was seeing." Victoria stood slowly. "You're making a terrible mistake." "The only mistake," Marcus said, "was thinking you could hide poison from a father who has everything to lose." "You want to threaten me?" Victoria stepped closer. "Do you know what happens to janitors who bite the hand that feeds them? You lose your job, your apartment, your little girl." Marcus bent down and picked up Emma's drawing. In the crayon sketch, the hero's badge was crooked but proud. "My daughter draws me as a hero because she thinks that's what daddies do. Protect people. Keep them safe." His voice cracked slightly. "She asked me every morning if I helped someone at work." The boardroom fell silent. Marcus reached into his cart and pulled out a small recorder. "Tonight, I'm going to have an answer for her." He pressed play. Victoria's voice filled the room. "Environmental data stays buried until merger close. By the time anyone finds contamination, we'll have our payout." Williams dropped his pen. Victoria's recorded voice continued. "A few sick kids are worth $10 billion. Who's going to believe a janitor anyway?" Marcus stopped the recording. The silence was deafening. "My 8-year-old daughter believes her daddy is a hero," he said quietly. "Don't make her wrong." Victoria's face had turned gray. "The vote is in 20 minutes, Marcus added. "The question is whether you want to be the board that chose poison over people, or the one that let a little girl keep believing in heroes." Dr. Chen was already reaching for her phone. "I'm calling the EPA," she announced. "This vote is suspended." 30 minutes later, Marcus sat in his supply closet office, hands still shaking. The walls were covered with Emma's drawings, superheroes, rainbows, and stick figures of Daddy at work. His engineering textbooks gathered dust on a shelf above cleaning supplies. Dr. Chen's EPA call had bought them time, but Victoria's lawyers were already moving. Through the thin walls, he could hear urgent phone conversations about containment strategies and damage control. Marcus pulled out his maintenance access card and studied the magnetic strip. For 2 years, this card had given him access to every floor, every office, every secret his company thought they could hide. They saw a janitor. He saw an engineer who'd lost everything in the last recession and took whatever work he could find to keep Emma fed. His phone buzzed. A text from Emma's babysitter. "She's asking when you're coming home." "Should I tell her you're working late again?" Marcus looked at his daughter's newest drawing taped to the wall, a stick figure man standing in front of a big building with the words "Daddy helps people" written in purple crayon. He'd promised Emma he would always tell her the truth. Tonight, he'd finally have a good answer. The memory of Victoria's dismissal still burned. 3 weeks ago, Marcus had followed proper channels, submitted a formal environmental concern through the employee portal, requested a meeting through her assistant, even left a detailed voicemail explaining the contamination patterns he'd observed. Victoria's response had been swift and humiliating. "Listen carefully," she'd said in front of the entire executive reception area. "You're the cleaning guy. You mop floors, you empty trash. You don't analyze environmental data because you don't have the education or authority to understand what you're looking at." The security footage from that day now sat in Marcus's cart, evidence of professional retaliation. Victoria had made one critical mistake. She'd dismissed him publicly, creating witnesses. The assistant who'd initially shown sympathy, the security guard who'd watched the whole encounter, the night supervisor who'd vouched for Marcus's character. What Victoria didn't know was that Marcus had a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering from State University. What she definitely didn't know was that he'd been systematically documenting every contamination event for months, waiting for the right moment to act. That moment had arrived when he'd discovered the merger documents scattered across her desk during his cleaning rounds. Emma's future was worth more than Victoria's arrogance. Marcus's phone rang. Emma's voice, sleepy and concerned. "Daddy, Mrs. Peterson says you're working super late again. Are you okay?" "I'm okay, sweetheart. Daddy's just helping some people who need help." "Like in my picture?" Marcus looked at the drawing on his wall, the one where he wore a cape and stood in front of their apartment building, protecting it from storm clouds. "Exactly like in your picture, Emma. Will you tell me about it tomorrow? Mrs. Peterson says real heroes always have good stories." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the chest. If Victoria succeeded in discrediting him, if she managed to frame him as a disgruntled employee making false accusations, he wouldn't just lose his job. The custody evaluator would see him as unstable, unemployed, unable to provide for Emma. His ex-wife had been waiting for exactly this kind of ammunition. "Daddy, you're quiet. I'm here, baby. And yes, I'll have a story for you tomorrow. I promise." "A good story? With a happy ending?" Marcus closed his eyes. "The best story. Now get some sleep. I love you." "Love you too, Daddy. Don't work too hard saving people." The line went dead. Marcus stared at his reflection in the dark window. Everything he'd built for Emma, their small apartment, her school, her stability, hung in the balance. But so did the health of thousands of families who would drink poison water if this merger proceeded. Emma believed her daddy was a hero. Tonight, he had to prove she was right. Marcus pulled Emma's latest drawing from his wallet, the one she'd given him that morning before school. It was different from the others, more detailed, more intentional. In this picture, he wasn't wearing a janitor's uniform. He was wearing a suit and tie, standing at a podium in front of a crowd of people. Above his head, she'd written, "Daddy tells the truth." At the bottom, in careful 8-year-old handwriting, "Heroes don't need capes. They just need to be brave when nobody believes them." The drawing was prophetic in a way that made Marcus's chest tight. Emma had drawn this before she knew about the merger, before she knew about the contamination, before she knew her daddy would have to choose between safety and truth. Somehow, his 8-year-old daughter understood something that Victoria Sterling never would. Real heroes weren't the people with power. They were the people willing to use whatever they had, even if it was just access cards and cleaning carts and children's drawings, to protect others. Marcus carefully folded the drawing and put it back in his wallet. Then he opened his laptop and began typing an email to every environmental lawyer in the state. If Victoria wanted to destroy him, she'd have to go through Emma's hero first. And Marcus Rodriguez wasn't going down without a fight. The compliance office was supposed to be empty at midnight, but the computer was still logged in. Marcus had used his maintenance clearance hundreds of times to clean this room, but tonight felt different. Tonight he was crossing a line he couldn't uncross. The email inbox was open on the screen. Hundreds of messages about environmental protocols, regulatory filings, merger preparations. Marcus scrolled through them systematically, his engineering training helping him identify the important threads. Then he found it. A voicemail notification from 6 months ago marked "Urgent, Confidential." Marcus clicked play. Victoria Sterling's voice filled the empty office. "Jim, it's Victoria. The contamination readings came back worse than expected. We need a containment strategy that keeps this buried until after merger close. Environmental cleanup can happen later. Right now, we need plausible deniability. Call me back with options." Marcus sat back in the chair, his heart pounding. This wasn't negligence. This was deliberate fraud. The voicemail had been intended for the compliance officer, but somehow misdirected to the general inbox. Victoria had no idea a permanent record existed of her admission. Under SEC whistleblower protection statutes, Marcus now had legal immunity for reporting securities fraud. The regulations were clear. Employees who report violations in good faith are protected from retaliation during federal investigations. But protection and survival weren't the same thing. Victoria could still destroy his life before any investigation concluded. Marcus downloaded the voicemail file to a secure drive. There was no going back now. Marcus pulled up Delaware merger law on the compliance office computer. The statutes were complex, but his engineering background had taught him to read technical documents carefully. Delaware General Corporation Law, Section 251, was clear. Emergency shareholder vote procedures could halt any merger upon discovery of material misrepresentation. If Marcus could prove Victoria knew about contamination before the merger announcement, the entire deal could be suspended pending investigation. He cross-referenced the voicemail timestamp with the merger announcement date. Victoria had recorded her admission 3 weeks before, publicly declaring the merger as environmentally sound to shareholders. The evidence was ironclad, but the timeline was brutal. According to the merger documents scattered across Victoria's desk, the final vote was scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Marcus had less than 9 hours to build a case that could survive Victoria's legal team. His phone buzzed with an email notification. The environmental lawyers he'd contacted were responding, but their messages were cautious. Interesting allegations. Would need substantial evidence. Recommend consulting with SEC before proceeding. Marcus looked at Emma's drawing in his wallet. The stick figure at the podium telling the truth to a crowd of people. His daughter had drawn the roadmap. He just had to be brave enough to follow it. Marcus began forwarding the voicemail and supporting documents to the SEC's whistleblower portal. By morning, Victoria Sterling would discover that dismissing the cleaning guy was the biggest mistake of her career. The building's security office was Marcus's next stop. Officer Williams had been working night shift for 5 years. Long enough to remember Marcus reporting strange chemical odors months ago. Marcus! Williams looked up from his bank of monitors. You're working late again. Emma's going to forget what you look like. Actually, I need your help with something. Marcus pulled up a chair next to Williams's desk. Remember back in March when I mentioned those weird smells coming from the chemical storage area? Williams nodded slowly. Yeah, you filed a maintenance report. Said it smelled like industrial solvent. Do you still have the incident logs from those nights? Williams pulled up the database on his computer. March 15th, March 22nd, March 29th, all during your shift like you said. Why? Marcus showed him the contamination readings from the merger documents. Williams' eyes widened as he matched the dates. Holy hell, Marcus. These readings show massive chemical discharge on the exact same nights you reported the odors. And my access card records prove I was in those areas during the contamination events, Marcus added. I wasn't just smelling it, I was documenting it without realizing it. Williams pulled up Marcus's access card history. A clear pattern emerged. Tuesday and Thursday nights, Marcus had swiped into the chemical storage areas to investigate the odors. The timestamps matched the contamination spikes perfectly. Marcus, this is huge. You've been creating a paper trail of evidence for months. The question is, will you testify to what you witnessed? Williams looked at the data on his screen, then at Marcus. Emma draws you as a hero, right? Kids that age, they see things pretty clearly. Marcus nodded. Then, yeah, I'll testify. Someone needs to speak up for all those families who'll be drinking this water. Williams began printing out the access logs and incident reports. Marcus had his corroboration. The evidence trail was complete. Now he just had to survive long enough to present it. At 6 a.m., Marcus submitted his formal whistleblower complaint through the company portal, copying the board chair and SEC Enforcement Division. The complaint was methodical, professional, and devastating. 16 pages of environmental data, timeline analysis, and supporting documentation. Within 30 minutes, his phone rang. Mr. Rodriguez, this is Janet Miller from Legal. We need you in Conference Room B immediately for employee counseling regarding your recent allegations. Marcus arrived to find 3 people waiting, Miller, HR Director Thompson, and 2 security guards. No board representation, no environmental experts, just corporate damage control. Mr. Rodriguez, we're concerned about your mental state, Miller began, sliding a folder across the table. Night shift work can be isolating. We think you may be experiencing some confusion about what you've observed. Marcus opened the folder. psychiatric evaluation forms, stress leave applications, a generous severance package contingent on signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. We're prepared to offer you 6 months paid leave and job placement assistance. Thompson added, all we need is your acknowledgement that these environmental concerns were based on misunderstanding rather than factual observation. Marcus looked at the forms, then at the security guards flanked by the door. And if I don't sign, then we proceed with disciplinary action for misuse of company resources, unauthorized access to executive areas, and theft of proprietary documents. Miller replied smoothly. Felony charges carry prison time, Mr. Rodriguez, and convicted felons don't retain custody of their children. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Marcus thought of Emma's drawing in his wallet, the hero standing at the podium, telling the truth. I need time to consider this. You have until noon, Miller said. After that, we involve law enforcement. Marcus stood and walked out, leaving the forms unsigned. The real battle was just beginning. Marcus drove to a coffee shop across town and called the former compliance officer whose name had appeared in Victoria's email chains. Jim Hendricks had left the company suddenly 3 months ago, right after the environmental readings had spiked. Mr. Hendricks, this is Marcus Rodriguez from Techdyne. I'm calling about environmental compliance issues you may have observed before your departure. A long pause. Who did you say you were? Night shift maintenance. I've been documenting contamination events that align with your compliance reports from earlier this year. Another pause. I can't talk about this over the phone. Meet me at Riverside Park in 1 hour. Come alone. Hendricks was nervous, chain-smoking by the river when Marcus arrived. His hands shook as he lit each cigarette. Victoria Sterling destroyed my career, Hendricks said without preamble. When I refused to falsify environmental reports, she made sure I'd never work in compliance again, blacklisted me throughout the industry. Marcus showed him the contamination data and voicemail evidence. Hendricks's face went pale. Jesus Christ. She actually recorded herself admitting to the cover-up. Will you testify? You don't understand. I have a family, a mortgage. Victoria has connections everywhere. If I speak out, I'll lose everything. Marcus pulled out Emma's drawing and showed it to Hendricks. My daughter thinks I'm a hero. She's 8 years old. In 12 hours, I either prove she's right or lose her forever. Hendricks stared at the drawing for a long moment. Delaware merger suspension bylaws, he said finally. If you can prove material misrepresentation occurred before shareholder disclosure, any board member can demand emergency suspension pending investigation. Will you provide that proof? Hendricks dropped his cigarette and ground it under his heel. Victoria threatened my family once. She said if I ever spoke about what I knew, she'd make sure my kids knew their daddy was a liar who chose money over truth. Marcus waited. But your kid already knows you're a hero, Hendricks continued. Maybe it's time someone proved Victoria wrong. He extended his hand. I'll testify, but we need legal protection first. Back in his supply closet office, Marcus spread environmental impact charts across his desk. Using EPA guidelines and regulatory formulas from his engineering textbooks, he began calculating the true cost of Victoria's deception. The numbers were staggering. Groundwater contamination affecting a 15-mile radius. Cleanup costs estimated at $400 million. Potential class action lawsuits totaling billions. Federal fines that would dwarf the merger's value. Marcus created a simple chart showing 2 scenarios, immediate disclosure and cleanup versus continued cover-up. In Scenario 1, Techdyne survived with massive but manageable losses. In Scenario 2, the company faced regulatory shutdown and criminal prosecution. The acquiring company had no idea they were purchasing a toxic waste site disguised as a technology campus. Marcus printed multiple copies of his analysis and sealed them in separate envelopes. He addressed one to every board member, one to the acquiring company's CEO, and one to the local newspaper's environmental reporter. Emma's newest drawing caught his eye from the wall, the one showing him in a suit at a podium. But looking closer, Marcus noticed something he'd missed before. In the background of Emma's drawing, she'd included other stick figures, families, children, all looking up at the hero daddy, waiting to be protected. His daughter hadn't just drawn him as a hero. She'd drawn him as someone responsible for protecting everyone's children. The weight of that responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders like a lead blanket. This wasn't just about proving Emma right anymore. It was about preventing thousands of other children from drinking poisoned water. Victoria had made this personal when she threatened Emma. Now Marcus would make it public. The building's security office held the final piece of Marcus's puzzle. Officer Williams had volunteered to review surveillance footage from Victoria's dismissive encounter 3 weeks ago. Here it is, Williams said, queuing up the video on his monitor. March 28th, executive reception area. The footage was damning. Crystal clear audio of Victoria saying, "You're just the cleaning guy," and "You don't have the education or authority to understand environmental data." Her dismissive gesture, her condescending smile, the visible discomfort of her assistant and other witnesses. "That's workplace discrimination," Williams observed, disparaging an employee based on job classification rather than addressing legitimate safety concerns. Marcus nodded grimly. The footage created additional legal exposure for Victoria, employment law violations on top of securities fraud. "There's more," Williams continued, fast-forwarding through the timeline. "Look at this." The video showed Victoria's immediate reaction after Marcus left. She'd pulled out her phone and made a call, speaking quietly but urgently. Williams enhanced the audio. "Containment protocol needs to be accelerated. Environmental concerns are surfacing from maintenance staff. We need full denial strategy by tomorrow." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Victoria had implemented cover-up measures immediately after dismissing his concerns. The security footage proved premeditation and obstruction. "Will you testify about what you witnessed?" Marcus asked. Williams ejected the surveillance disc and handed it to Marcus. "I've been watching people lie in this building for 5 years. Your daughter's hero drawing is taped to that cleaning cart because you're the only honest person left in this place." He paused, looking directly at Marcus. "Whatever happens in that boardroom tomorrow, Emma's going to be proud of her daddy." Marcus slipped the disc into his jacket pocket. The evidence was complete. The witnesses were ready. In 6 hours, Victoria Sterling would discover that underestimating a father's love for his daughter was the costliest mistake of her career. Marcus drove to the downtown library and used their public computer to file his SEC whistleblower complaint through the federal portal. The online system required extensive documentation, but Marcus had prepared meticulously: environmental data, audio evidence, timeline analysis, witness statements. As he uploaded the final files, his phone buzzed with an urgent text from Emma's babysitter. "2 men in suits came to the apartment asking about you. Emma's scared. I told them you were at work, but they said they'd be back." Marcus's blood ran cold. Victoria was moving faster than expected. He called the SEC enforcement hotline immediately. A duty officer answered on the second ring. "This is Agent Sarah Chen, SEC Enforcement. I understand you filed a whistleblower complaint regarding securities fraud. Techdyne Corporation $10 billion merger based on falsified environmental data. I have recorded evidence of executive knowledge prior to shareholder disclosure. Mr. Rodriguez, these are serious allegations. Federal whistleblower protection shields you from retaliation during our investigation, but we need additional documentation within 24 hours to proceed with emergency intervention." 24 hours. The merger vote was in 4 hours. "Agent Chen, they're already threatening my daughter. Corporate security is escalating beyond legal boundaries. Document everything. Record all interactions. We're opening an active investigation, but you need to stay safe until we can intervene officially." Marcus hung up, his hands shaking. Victoria wasn't just fighting dirty. She was fighting desperately. That meant she knew the evidence was damning enough to destroy her, but it also meant Emma was in danger. Marcus called his ex-wife. "Sarah, I need you to pick up Emma from the babysitters right now. Take her to your mother's place. Don't ask questions, just do it." "Marcus, what's going on?" "I'm stopping something terrible from happening. Emma will understand when she's older. Just keep her safe." Marcus had to choose: protect his daughter or protect thousands of other children from poisoned water. The hero in Emma's drawing wouldn't have hesitated. With 2 hours until the merger vote, Marcus arranged a conference call with Jim Hendricks and Agent Chen. They met in a secure government building downtown, the kind of place where corporate lawyers couldn't intimidate witnesses. "Mr. Hendricks," Agent Chen began, "we need your testimony about environmental cover-up coordination at Techdyne Corporation." Hendricks was pale but determined. "Victoria Sterling ordered me to falsify environmental compliance reports 6 months ago. When I refused, she threatened my family and destroyed my career. She said a few sick kids were acceptable losses for $10 billion. Marcus activated his recorder as Hendricks provided detailed testimony about Victoria's containment strategy. the systematic burial of contamination data, manipulation of regulatory filings, and intimidation of employees who discovered the fraud. The environmental violations began 8 months ago. Hendricks continued. Chemical storage protocols were deliberately ignored to reduce operational costs. Victoria knew the contamination would be discovered eventually, but she calculated that post-merger cleanup would be the acquiring company's responsibility. Agent Chen took extensive notes. Mr. Hendricks, are you willing to testify under oath that Victoria Sterling had personal knowledge of environmental fraud prior to merger announcement? I have email documentation proving she ordered the cover-up. She threatened me personally to ensure my silence, and she specifically stated that shareholder value was more important than public safety. Marcus felt a surge of vindication, but Agent Chen's next words brought him back to reality. Gentlemen, our investigation provides you with federal protection, but the merger vote is proceeding in 90 minutes. Unless we can present evidence directly to shareholders, this fraud will be legally consummated before we can intervene. Hendricks looked at Marcus. That means you have to speak at the shareholder meeting, publicly, in front of Victoria and her legal team. Marcus thought of Emma's drawing, the stick figure at the podium, telling the truth to a crowd. His daughter had been preparing him for this moment all along. Agent Chen, will SEC presence at the shareholder meeting provide legal protection for witness testimony? If federal investigators are present, corporate retaliation becomes a federal crime. We can have agents at the meeting in 60 minutes. Marcus stood up. Then let's go save some lives. The SEC field office conference room became Marcus's command center. Evidence was spread across a large table. Environmental reports, audio recordings, email chains, surveillance footage, access logs, and witness statements. Agent Chen coordinated with federal attorneys while Marcus and Hendricks prepared their presentation. The key is shareholder impact, Agent Chen explained. Corporate fraud becomes securities violation when shareholders make decisions based on false information. Your environmental data proves material misrepresentation. Marcus organized the evidence chronologically, creating a timeline that any shareholder could understand. Chemical contamination began 8 months ago. Victoria knew about it 6 months ago. Merger announcement occurred 3 months ago with false environmental clearances. Shareholders were deliberately deceived. Emergency injunction procedures, Agent Chen continued, allow federal courts to halt mergers immediately upon evidence of securities fraud, but we need shareholders to demand suspension before the vote concludes. Hendricks pulled up corporate governance documents on his laptop. Shareholder meeting procedures require disclosure of material information before major votes. Any shareholder can demand emergency recess for new evidence. Marcus studied the shareholder list. 200 investors representing pension funds, mutual funds, and individual retirement accounts. People like Emma's teacher, the grocery store clerk, his neighbor who worked double shifts to save for her daughter's college. These aren't wealthy executives, Marcus observed. These are working families who trusted Techdyne with their life savings. Agent Chen nodded grimly. Victoria Sterling is stealing from the same people she's poisoning. Your testimony could save their investments and their health. Marcus looked at Emma's drawing, now propped against a stack of environmental reports. The stick figure hero stood confidently at the podium, protecting families in the background. His daughter hadn't just drawn a picture, she'd drawn a prophecy. Agent Chen, how do I present technical evidence to non-technical shareholders? Simple language, clear consequences, personal stakes. She paused. Tell them about Emma. Tell them why a father's love matters more than corporate profits. Marcus began rehearsing his presentation. In 45 minutes, he would either vindicate Emma's faith in her hero daddy or lose everything trying. Marcus learned that shareholder meeting procedures contained one crucial provision he hadn't considered. Any shareholder could formally request floor time during the voting process to present new material information affecting the merger decision. Delaware corporate law requires informed shareholder consent, Agent Chen explained. If you can prove shareholders lack material information, the vote becomes legally invalid. Marcus pulled out his phone and called Officer Williams at Techdyne Security. Williams, I need you to check something. Am I listed as a shareholder in company records? Hold on. Williams typed on his computer. Yeah, you have employee stock options from your hiring package. Technically makes you a minority shareholder with meeting participation rights. Perfect. Marcus had legal standing to address the shareholders directly. There's more. Williams continued. Victoria's legal team tried to cancel the meeting 30 minutes ago, but shareholder majority voted to proceed. They're demanding answers about the environmental allegations. The shareholders were already suspicious. Victoria's attempt to avoid scrutiny had backfired, creating exactly the opening Marcus needed. Agent Chen checked her watch. Mr. Rodriguez, federal investigators will be present at the meeting, but you'll need to formally request floor time according to parliamentary procedure. Are you prepared for Victoria's legal team to challenge your right to speak? Marcus thought about Victoria's threat to take Emma away, her dismissive cleaning guy comment, her recorded admission about acceptable losses from a few sick kids. Agent Chen, I've been preparing for this confrontation my entire life. I just didn't know it until my daughter drew me a roadmap. He gathered the evidence files and headed for the door. Let's go show Victoria Sterling what happens when you threaten a hero's family. The shareholders' meeting hall was 12 blocks away. In 20 minutes, Marcus would either save his company or watch it burn with Victoria's lies. But Emma would finally see her daddy tell the truth to a crowd of people, exactly like in her drawing. Jim Hendricks led Marcus to his home office, a cramped room filled with file cabinets and computer equipment. I kept everything, Hendricks said, unlocking a secure laptop. Every email, every document, every piece of evidence that proves Victoria planned this from the beginning. The archived email system opened to reveal hundreds of internal communications spanning 8 months. Hendricks navigated to a folder labeled Environmental Containment, Confidential. Here, he said, clicking on an email thread from 6 months ago. This is what Victoria doesn't know I saved. The first email was from Victoria to Hendricks, dated 3 weeks before the merger announcement. Jim, environmental readings are worse than anticipated. We need comprehensive containment strategy that keeps contamination data buried until post-merger integration. Cleanup becomes acquiring company's liability after closing. Board cannot know actual environmental status until deal is legally irrevocable. Draft plausible deniability protocols immediately. VS. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The premeditation was explicit. Hendricks scrolled down to his own response. Victoria, I cannot falsify environmental compliance reports. This violates federal regulations and puts public health at risk. We need to disclose contamination to shareholders before voting. JH. Victoria's reply was devastating. Jim, you're overcomplicating this. A few sick kids are acceptable losses for $10 billion. Environmental cleanup happens after payout. If you're not comfortable with necessary business decisions, perhaps Techdyne isn't the right fit for your career aspirations. Think about your family's financial security before making any rash decisions. V's. She threatened my kids in writing, Hendricks said quietly, and then she followed through. The final email in the thread was Victoria's termination notice for Hendricks, citing philosophical differences regarding corporate priorities and inability to support executive decision-making processes. Marcus stared at the screen. She planned to frame me as a disgruntled employee, didn't she? Hendricks nodded and opened another email folder. Look at this. The subject line read, Marcus Rodriguez, Containment Protocol. Victoria's message was clinical and ruthless. Environmental concerns are surfacing from night maintenance staff. Rodriguez. Marcus. Single father. Custody issues. Financial vulnerability. Implement standard discredit protocol. Psychiatric evaluation. Stress leave. NDA with severance. If Rodriguez refuses cooperation, proceed with security breach allegations and law enforcement referral. Single parents rarely risk criminal charges that jeopardize child custody. VS. Marcus felt rage building in his chest. Victoria had researched his vulnerabilities, identified Emma as leverage, and planned his destruction with corporate precision. But she'd made one critical error. She'd documented everything. This proves conspiracy and premeditation, Marcus said. She didn't just know about the contamination. She actively planned to cover it up and destroy anyone who threatened her scheme. Hendricks saved the email files to an encrypted drive. Every communication in this system becomes evidence under federal discovery rules. Victoria thought she was protecting herself with documentation. Instead, she created a complete record of securities fraud. Marcus looked at the timestamp on Victoria's final email. It was dated yesterday, after his confrontation in the boardroom, after his whistleblower filing, after she'd threatened Emma. Victoria Sterling had been planning to frame him all along. The courthouse steps buzzed with activity as Marcus, Hendricks, and Agent Chen coordinated their final strategy. In 15 minutes, the shareholder meeting would begin. Federal investigators were already positioning themselves in the meeting hall. "Complete witness list," Agent Chen confirmed, checking her notes. Marcus Rodriguez providing environmental evidence and timeline documentation. Jim Hendricks testifying about executive conspiracy and cover-up coordination. Officer Williams confirming access logs and surveillance footage. SEC enforcement providing federal oversight and protection. Marcus felt the weight of Emma's drawing in his wallet. The stick figure hero at the podium, surrounded by families waiting to be protected. Everything had led to this moment. "Mr. Rodriguez," Agent Chen continued, "Victoria's legal team will attempt to discredit you personally. They'll focus on your employment status, your education level, your custody situation. Stay focused on the evidence, not their attacks." Hendricks pulled up the shareholder list on his phone. 200 investors representing 40,000 individual retirement accounts. These people trusted Techdyne with their life savings. Victoria's fraud affects entire families. Marcus thought about Emma's teacher, who'd mentioned her modest teacher's pension was invested in Techdyne stock. His neighbor, who worked 2 jobs to build college savings for her daughter. The grocery store clerk who'd bragged about his retirement portfolio's performance. Victoria wasn't just poisoning groundwater. She was stealing from working families who believed corporate executives were trustworthy. "Agent Chen, what happens if shareholders vote to proceed despite our evidence?" Federal injunction halts the merger immediately. But public presentation of evidence creates permanent legal record. Victoria can't claim ignorance once shareholder testimony is documented. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife. "Emma's safe at Mom's. She wanted me to tell you she's proud of her hero daddy. Whatever you're doing, finish it." The courthouse clock tower chimed 8:45 a.m. The shareholder meeting would begin in 15 minutes. Marcus looked up at the government building where Agent Chen worked, then across the street at the corporate conference center where Victoria waited with her legal team. 2 different worlds, 2 different versions of justice. Emma had drawn him at a podium, telling the truth to a crowd of people. She'd seen this moment before it happened, believed in her daddy's courage before he'd found it himself. "Gentlemen," Agent Chen said, gathering her files, "it's time to let a little girl's hero save some lives." Marcus touched Emma's drawing through his wallet. "Let's go prove my daughter right." The 3 of them walked toward the conference center, federal investigators flanking them like an honor guard. In 10 minutes, Victoria Sterling would discover that threatening a hero's family was the costliest mistake of her career. But Emma would finally see her daddy become the man she'd always believed him to be. And the shareholder meeting hall entrance was blocked by 3 security guards and Victoria's head of legal operations. Marcus approached with Agent Chen and Hendricks, but the guards stepped forward aggressively. "Mr. Rodriguez is not authorized to attend this meeting," the lead security supervisor announced. "He's been suspended pending internal investigation for theft of corporate property and unauthorized access to confidential documents." Agent Chen stepped forward, displaying her federal credentials. "Special Agent Sarah Chen, SEC Enforcement Division. Mr. Rodriguez is a protected federal witness in an active securities fraud investigation. Any interference with his testimony constitutes obstruction of federal proceedings." Victoria's lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Kane, emerged from behind the guards. "Agent Chen, Mr. Rodriguez may be under federal protection, but this is a private corporate meeting. He has no legal standing to address shareholders." Marcus pulled out his employee stock option documentation. "I'm a minority shareholder with participation rights under Delaware corporate governance statutes. I have legal standing to present material information affecting merger decisions." Kane examined the documents, her confident expression faltering slightly. "These options don't vest for another 6 months. You're not technically a shareholder yet." The guards moved closer. Agent Chen placed her hand on her radio. Marcus felt his heart sinking. After everything, the evidence, the witnesses, the federal protection, he might be blocked by a technicality. Then Officer Williams appeared from inside the meeting hall. "Excuse me," Williams called out, approaching the group with a thick folder. "Mr. Rodriguez, you left these in the security office." He handed Marcus a stack of documents, share certificates from Techdyne's employee ownership program. "Your participation in the company retirement plan automatically enrolled you as a voting shareholder 18 months ago. Williams explained loudly enough for Kane to hear. Board chair requested I verify your shareholder status for meeting attendance. Kane's face went pale as she reviewed the certificates. Marcus was indeed a legitimate shareholder with full participation rights. Agent Chen smiled grimly. Miss Kane, federal investigators are present in this meeting hall. Any further attempts to prevent legitimate shareholder testimony will result in federal obstruction charges. The guards stepped aside reluctantly. Victoria's first line of defense had crumbled. Marcus walked through the entrance, Agent Chen and Hendricks flanking him. Inside, 200 shareholders filled the conference hall, waiting for answers about environmental allegations that had dominated morning news coverage. Victoria Sterling sat at the executive table, her face a mask of controlled fury. She'd lost the first battle, but the war was just beginning. Board Chair Williams called the meeting to order at exactly 9 a.m. The merger vote was scheduled for 9:30 a.m., 30 minutes for Marcus to present 8 months of evidence to 200 skeptical investors. Before we proceed to the merger vote, Williams announced several material concerns have been raised regarding environmental compliance and shareholder disclosure. Ms. Sterling, would you like to address these allegations? Victoria stood confidently, her legal team arrayed behind her. Thank you, Robert. These environmental concerns stem from a disgruntled maintenance employee who lacks the technical expertise to interpret complex environmental data. Our legal team has prepared a comprehensive response to these unfounded allegations. She gestured toward Patricia Kane, who began distributing packets to the shareholders. These documents demonstrate that Mr. Rodriguez has a history of workplace conflicts, financial instability, and personal issues that compromise his reliability as a witness. Marcus felt the familiar sting of condescension, but Agent Chen's presence reminded him that federal law now protected his testimony. Furthermore, Victoria continued, Mr. Rodriguez has been suspended for theft of proprietary documents and unauthorized access to confidential areas. His motivations are clearly retaliatory rather than public-spirited. Murmurs rippled through the shareholder assembly. Victoria's character assassination was effective. Marcus could see doubt spreading across faces in the audience. Board Chair Williams consulted his parliamentary procedure manual. Mr. Rodriguez, as a shareholder, you have the right to present material information affecting this merger decision. Do you wish to address the assembly? Marcus stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 200 pairs of eyes. Emma's drawing pressed against his chest through his wallet. The stick figure hero at the podium, telling the truth to a crowd of people. Yes, Mr. Williams, I have material evidence that this merger is based on fraudulent environmental data that puts shareholder investments and public health at risk. Victoria's smile was sharp as ice. Mr. Rodriguez, these shareholders are sophisticated investors who understand complex business decisions. They're not interested in conspiracy theories from someone who mops floors for a living. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus felt the familiar rage building. But then he remembered Emma's voice. Heroes don't need capes. They just need to be brave when nobody believes them. You're right, Miss Sterling, Marcus said quietly. I do mop floors. I also hold a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering, and I've been systematically documenting your cover-up of groundwater contamination for 8 months. He looked directly at the shareholders. The question isn't whether you believe a janitor. The question is whether you believe the evidence. Marcus walked to the presentation podium as Agent Chen activated the projection system. Time to let his daughter's hero tell the truth. Marcus connected his laptop to the projection system, displaying environmental data, contamination timelines, and regulatory violations for all shareholders to see. The technical presentation was methodical, professional, and devastating. Chemical contamination began 8 months ago, Marcus explained, pointing to the first data spike. Groundwater readings show industrial solvent levels 40 times above EPA safety limits. The contamination affects a 15-mile radius, including 3 elementary schools and 2 residential neighborhoods. He clicked to the next slide, a timeline comparing contamination events with corporate communications. Miss Sterling knew about these violations 6 months before the merger announcement. I have recorded evidence of her admitting the cover-up was deliberate. Victoria's lawyer, Kane, stood up. Objection. Mr. Rodriguez has no authority to present allegedly confidential recordings without. Agent Chen interrupted from the back of the room. Miss Kane, this is a shareholder meeting, not a courtroom, and these recordings are evidence in an active federal investigation. Marcus clicked play on Victoria's voicemail. Environmental data stays buried until merger close. By the time anyone finds contamination, we'll have our payout. The room fell silent. Several shareholders began taking notes. Marcus continued with clinical precision. EPA cleanup costs for this contamination, $400 million. Potential class action lawsuits, $2 billion. Federal regulatory fines, suspension of all operations until environmental compliance is achieved. He displayed financial projections showing two scenarios, immediate disclosure versus continued cover-up. In the first scenario, Tekdyne survived with manageable losses. In the second, the company faced complete regulatory shutdown. Ms. Sterling calculated that environmental cleanup would become the acquiring company's responsibility after merger completion. She deliberately withheld material information that affects shareholder value and public safety. Dr. Chen, the Environmental Committee Chair, stood up. Mr. Rodriguez, these contamination readings, if accurate, they represent massive regulatory exposure that wasn't disclosed in our merger review. Marcus nodded. Because Ms. Sterling ordered the compliance officer to falsify environmental reports. When he refused, she terminated his employment and threatened his family. Victoria finally stood, her composure cracking. These are fabricated allegations from a disgruntled employee seeking financial gain through false accusations. Marcus looked directly at her. Ms. Sterling, are you willing to deny under oath and before federal investigators that you recorded a voicemail admitting environmental cover-up 6 months ago? Victoria's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. The silence stretched uncomfortably. I thought not, Marcus said quietly. Marcus pulled Emma's drawing from his wallet and held it up for the shareholders to see. The crayon sketch of a stick figure hero at a podium, protecting families in the background. My 8-year-old daughter drew this picture because she believes her daddy protects people, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. She asks me every morning if I help someone at work. For 8 months, I couldn't give her a good answer. He set the drawing on the podium and looked out at 200 faces. Teachers, firefighters, nurses, retirees, people who'd trusted Tekdyne with their life savings. Miss Sterling called me just the cleaning guy because she thought my job title made my evidence worthless. But I've been cleaning up her toxic mess for months. I've been mopping floors contaminated with industrial solvents while she told shareholders our environmental compliance was excellent. Marcus clicked to a final slide showing the elementary schools within the contamination radius. This isn't about corporate profits or stock prices. This is about whether we're willing to poison children's drinking water for money. Ms. Sterling calculated that a few sick kids were acceptable losses for $10 billion. Victoria shot to her feet. That's completely false. I never said. Marcus played another audio clip. Victoria's voice filled the room. A few sick kids are acceptable losses for $10 billion. Who's going to believe a janitor anyway? The gasps from shareholders were audible. Several people stood up, demanding explanations. Board Chair Williams called for order. Miss Sterling, these are extremely serious allegations. Do you have a response to this evidence? Victoria's face had turned gray. Her legal team was frantically whispering, but she remained silent. Dr. Chen addressed the shareholders. I move to suspend the merger vote pending federal environmental investigation. Seconded, called out a shareholder from the back. All in favor of merger suspension? Williams asked. Hands shot up throughout the hall. Marcus counted quickly, easily more than the required majority. Motion carries unanimously, Williams announced. The merger is suspended pending investigation. Agent Chen stepped forward as shareholders erupted in concerned conversations. Ladies and gentlemen, the Securities and Exchange Commission is opening a formal investigation into securities fraud and environmental violations at Tekdyne Corporation. Board Chair Williams consulted with the other directors, then returned to the podium. The Board of Directors votes to suspend CEO Victoria Sterling pending the completion of federal investigation. We will cooperate fully with SEC enforcement. Victoria stood frozen at the executive table as her legal team gathered documents. The merger she'd built her career on was destroyed. The cover-up she'd orchestrated was exposed. The man she'd dismissed as just the cleaning guy had systematically dismantled her entire conspiracy. The acquiring company's representative approached Williams. Given these revelations about environmental liability, we're withdrawing our acquisition offer immediately. Our shareholders won't accept responsibility for undisclosed toxic cleanup. Marcus watched Victoria's empire crumble in real time, but his focus shifted to the shareholders who were now safe from financial fraud and the families who would be protected from poisoned water. A shareholder approached Marcus as the meeting dissolved into chaos. "Mr. Rodriguez, my daughter attends Jefferson Elementary, one of the schools in your contamination zone. Thank you for protecting our children." Marcus thought of Emma's drawing, still sitting on the podium. The stick figure hero surrounded by families, keeping them safe. Agent Chen joined Marcus by the podium. "Mr. Rodriguez, formal criminal charges against Miss Sterling will be filed within 48 hours. Your testimony today will save thousands of families from environmental exposure and financial fraud." Marcus carefully folded Emma's drawing and returned it to his wallet. "Agent Chen, when do I get to go home and tell my daughter I helped people today?" "Right now," she replied, smiling. "Your part in this investigation is complete. You've earned the right to be your daughter's hero." Marcus looked around the conference hall one final time. Victoria Sterling was being escorted out by federal agents. Shareholders were demanding accountability and transparency. Environmental cleanup would begin immediately. But most importantly, Emma would finally see her daddy become the hero she'd always believed him to be. The janitor had cleaned up more than floors today. He'd cleaned up corporate lies, environmental crimes, and securities fraud. And somewhere across town, an 8-year-old girl was waiting to hear how her hero daddy had saved the day. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in his small apartment kitchen, cooking dinner for Emma while the evening news played in the background. The local anchor's voice filled the room with updates he'd been following closely. Former Techdyne CEO Victoria Sterling was indicted today on federal charges of securities fraud, environmental crimes, and obstruction of justice. The charges carry a maximum sentence of 20 years in federal prison and $200 million in fines. Emma looked up from her homework at the kitchen table. "Daddy, is that the bad lady who tried to hurt people?" Marcus nodded, stirring pasta sauce. "That's her, sweetheart. She made some very bad choices, and now she has to face the consequences." The news continued. The Environmental Protection Agency announced that groundwater cleanup at the former Techdyne facility will cost an estimated $400 million. A federal court ordered Sterling to pay full restitution to affected families and shareholders who lost investments due to her fraudulent scheme. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Chen. "Civil lawsuit settlement approved. $50 million fund established for affected families. Your whistleblower reward from SC, $2.8 million. Well deserved." Marcus stared at the message. The money would secure Emma's college education, allow them to move to a better neighborhood, provide the stability he'd always struggled to give her. But more importantly, the news anchor continued with the update Marcus had been waiting for. "Environmental testing confirms that groundwater contamination has been successfully contained. No families were exposed to toxic chemicals thanks to early detection and reporting." Emma's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Daddy, my teacher said you're famous for helping people. Is that true?" Marcus sat down next to her at the table. "I just did what heroes do, Emma. I protected people when they needed help." "Like in my drawing?" Marcus pulled the familiar crayon sketch from his wallet, now laminated and showing signs of wear from constant handling. "Exactly like in your drawing, baby. You saw it before I did." That night, Marcus tucked Emma into bed surrounded by her newest artwork. The walls were covered with updated drawings. Stick figures of her daddy speaking to crowds, families drinking clean water, children playing safely near the cleaned-up Techdyne facility. But the newest drawing was different. More sophisticated, more intentional. In this picture, Marcus wasn't wearing a janitor's uniform or a business suit. He was wearing a badge that read Environmental Compliance Director, his new position at Techdyne under the Federal Oversight Agreement. "Emma, this new drawing. How did you know about my promotion before I told you?" She looked up at him with 8-year-old wisdom that still amazed him. "Because heroes don't stop being heroes, Daddy. They just find new ways to help people." Marcus studied the drawing more carefully. In the background, Emma had included other stick figures. Agent Chen, Officer Williams, Mr. Hendricks, all the people who'd helped stop Victoria's scheme. "You drew everyone who helped, not just me. Heroes have friends," Emma explained matter-of-factly. "That's what makes them stronger." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. His daughter understood something that had taken him months to learn. courage wasn't about standing alone against impossible odds. It was about standing together with people who shared your values. Emma, do you remember when you said heroes don't need capes? Uh-huh. What do heroes need? Emma thought carefully, then smiled. They need to be brave when nobody believes them, and they need to remember that someone is always watching who wants them to do the right thing. Marcus kissed her forehead. You were watching, weren't you? You believed in me before I believed in myself. That's what daughters do, Emma said sleepily. We help our daddies remember their heroes. As Marcus turned off her bedroom light, Emma called out one more time. Daddy, tomorrow can you tell me about the people you helped today? For the first time in years, Marcus had a good answer ready. 6 months later, Marcus stood in his new office at Techdyne, now operating under federal environmental oversight with a completely restructured board of directors. Emma's original hero drawing hung framed on his wall next to his environmental engineering degree and a photo of the two of them at the company's environmental safety recognition ceremony. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Chen, now serving as interim CEO, entered with a young maintenance worker who looked nervous and uncertain. Marcus, I'd like you to meet James Patterson. He's been working night shift maintenance and has some environmental concerns he'd like to discuss. Marcus smiled and gestured for James to sit down. What did you observe, James? Well, sir, I've been noticing some unusual odors in the chemical storage area. Probably nothing, but I have a daughter at home, and I know you take these things seriously. Marcus opened his laptop and pulled up the environmental monitoring protocols he'd developed. James, you did exactly the right thing by reporting this. Let's document everything you've observed and get our environmental team to investigate immediately. As they worked through James's concerns, Marcus realized the cycle was complete. A father protecting his child had become a guardian, protecting all children. The little girl who'd drawn her daddy as a hero had created a legacy that extended far beyond their small family. Later that evening, Marcus drove home to find Emma waiting with her homework and a new drawing. This one showed the Techdyne building surrounded by clean water, with families and children playing safely nearby. At the center stood a stick figure with a badge reading Protector of Families. This is beautiful, Emma. But why did you change my title? Because that's what you really do, Daddy. You don't just fix environmental problems, you protect families like ours. Marcus looked at his daughter, now 9 years old, confident, secure, and still believing her father could save the world one honest day's work at a time. Real heroes aren't born in boardrooms or corner offices. They're forged in midnight shifts and single-parent households, where love for family transforms into protection for everyone's family. When you see something wrong, when you know someone needs help, when everyone else stays silent, that's your moment to clean up the lies and speak the truth. What would your child draw you doing? Subscribe for more stories about everyday heroes doing extraordinary things. Because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one with the mop and the moral courage to use it.